So I was commissioned to make a site-responsive bit of research that then turned into three sculptures for the building. And obviously this building is a pioneering research centre for dementia. So I wanted to reflect that in the work that I made. And actually the work, it transpires, evoke tools of discovery. Because I actually really wanted to reflect that kind of idea that this building is the pioneering frontier of this research. So the work kind of evokes an atlas, a compass, and an unfolding journey that is made through participation of people in the building itself. And that came about really because I had a couple, I suppose, of initial incentives in wanting to make the work when I was commissioned. I thought it would be very interesting to see if it was possible to treat the site as neurologists treat patients. So kind of thinking about looking beneath the surface of the site and kind of revealing the histories and stories there in much the same way that neurologists try to kind of image the brain and see beneath the surface of the skull. And what was quite interesting was that quickly it transpired that actually the technologies have a lot of correlation. You know, the site-penetrating radar that is used by archaeologists to kind of look what's beneath the surface of the ground is essentially very similar to what the technology that neurologists use to kind of, and a lot of it is mapping water. So MRI imaging, a lot of it is kind of using water atoms through electromagnetics. That was a very striking connection for me at the very beginning. And actually further to that, when I was looking at the imagery that was being created by the archaeologists using this site-penetrating radar, there is such a striking correlation to what the kind of the rivers around us and in our internal bloodstreams. I mean, I think that was what was so lovely, was the site actually did bear a connection to the human, you know, and actually you were seeing images that looked so like cell structures and so like streams going into deltas that felt like a really interesting way to map the site. And something that I knew that I was very interested about this particular site was that the River Fleet, the subterranean River Fleet, flows to the east, kind of through the east of the site. And I was interested in kind of, I suppose, conceptually positioning that next to the River Lethe in Hades, this idea that you drink of the water of the Lethe in order to kind of transform into the next life. So it gave me a departure point to start thinking about water through this idea of circularity and transformation, but also connection and kind of connecting to things that are bigger than yourself. So instead of thinking about dementias as these diseases that isolate and shut down, it was a way of thinking about change, but also cycles and coming back to things, which felt like it might give us a language to think about these diseases in a new way. And I think thinking about time and thinking about going under the surface was also something that had such a correlation. I mean, in my research, talking to one of the archaeologists, they told me that the top surface of 2 meters is archaeological time. And then beneath that, it's straight into geological time. So it's quite amazing to think about kind of 2,000 years or so of human habitation and it only being 2 meters that have accrued. And after that, you're into billions of years. So this kind of idea of our time scale as humans versus these kind of much bigger time scales and cycles felt really kind of epic and comforting at the same time, I suppose. And I think that something that I've really wanted to do in all of the work that I'm making is bring a kind of form of wonder into the space. Thinking about conceptually mirroring this idea of the Lethe and the Fleet led me to do a lot of research into the history of water on this site. And it turns out that there is this amazing connection between water and healthcare on this site. And in the 1700s, there was an astronomer called Dr. John Bevis, who was kind of a polymath of his day, if you like. And he found that the water, so the River Fleet is actually colloquially also named the River of Wells, because it's fed by so many wells as it flows from kind of Hampstead down to the Thames. And the site, the DRI, sits in a kind of triangulation of 3 wells. So you've got St Chad's Well just to the north, St Mary's Hole, which is kind of again just above the DRI towards King's Cross, and then Bagnage Wells is just to the east of the site. And Bagnage Wells, which actually really the DRI sits directly on, was found to have health-giving waters by Dr. John Bevis. And it actually became one of the biggest health spas in this country, which felt really amazing when I found out. So looking kind of further into Dr. John Bevis, I found that as well as looking kind of beneath the surface of the floor to these kind of waters, these spring waters, he was also kind of looking past the surface of the sky in some ways, because he was the first person to try and make a celestial map from his observatory in Stoke Newington called the Eurographica Britannica. Sadly, it never got published. But I think really this atlas for me was important because it was, again, evoking that ambition of this research centre. So I knew then that I wanted to make an atlas, but instead of using the skies above, I would think back to the water below our feet. And as we were commissioned in 2020 and it was lockdown, it was quite an interesting way to begin a project that is site-specific because I couldn't actually get on site for a really long time. So I was walking around, we were allowed these daily walks, and I was walking around the DRI, and sometimes we were allowed onto site, and so I could walk around the site. And I started doing these walks where I was following the River Fleet and looking at the ground below me. And actually what very quickly transpired is that a lot of what I was seeing was fossilised water. So the York stone paving slabs that are all over London have these amazing demarcations of water. And talking to Ruth Siddle, a geologist who's part of UCL, she said, yeah, absolutely, this is York stone. So this is fossilised water that you're seeing. So again, it's like this kind of really beautiful manifestations, I suppose, of histories and times that are kind of there quietly, kind of unseen, unexplored. So I started drawing these different spaces that were kind of the surface where the water was beneath. And I wanted to turn that surface into something that you could look through. It felt like, let's try and transform this. So the idea of windows and light boxes started coming into my mind. I think it's also, at this point, I was amazingly able to have a studio on site, which really transformed my way of working and the research that I was able to do. And I had a lot of dentist light boxes that were from the hospital around, so I was using them and making transparencies. And so the idea of making work that utilised a light box was quite interesting for me, because they do look like windows formally, but they also kind of have this scientific kind of hospital vernacular. So that there's 12 drawings that are from the different floors and spaces that all link to the fleet that are in and around the hospital. And they have been turned into kind of large-scale stained glass that are very deep indigo blue that's referencing the Golgi staining, which was the first cellular staining methods used by doctors. And the images themselves are quite interesting because they do look celestial. You're kind of looking at bits of chewing gum and you're thinking, is that something very big, very far away? Or are you looking at cell structures under your skin? They've got this real abstraction because they are, they're things that are around us all the time, that we never spend any attention really looking at. They take days to draw because it's just days of looking, really. So that simple transformation was quite interesting to me, that it turned it into something that was at once very familiar and very unfamiliar. And because they're now in stained glass and they're blue, they do look kind of celestial and watery and cellular all at the same time. And something that felt very important to me in making this work was this idea of how people will encounter the artworks. I've been talking about time a lot in this conversation, and I think time will be experienced very differently by everybody in the hospital, and time is experienced very differently when you have neurological diseases. So that was something that I wanted to reflect on, I suppose, and engage with. It felt really clear to me that I didn't want to make a static piece of work that felt, on every encounter the same. I wanted to make something, again, I suppose, echoing this research that was always changing, so that every time you saw a piece of the work, it would be a completely fresh encounter. It would be a completely new thing. So I wanted the light boxes to change. I knew that. So I started asking people that had been working with me, could you give me a day in a month from around the year and a place around the world that is pertinent? It might be for neurological reasons, it might be for personal reasons, but if you could just give me a day around the calendar year, which we collected. And then I was really lucky to work with Connor Nelson from the Climate Research Department at UCL. We basically took the meteorological data of that day. So we have, for example, a day in December from Antarctica, and we have a day in Egypt and a day in New Zealand. And these will light the different light boxes. So it's kind of a spatial and temporal atlas, if you like. You've got 12 different light boxes that are fragmented around the building. So I'd like the idea that you might not see them all and you might discover them. And again, they're kind of little hints of wonder, I suppose. So they're going to be lit at different times. And the building is open for 24 hours a day. So it felt really important to have windows that were awake when other people were awake as well and the rest of London was asleep. Yeah, so that's Laertes' Atlas. So furtive ground, for that I wanted to kind of work materially with the site. And as I say, I was really, really lucky to be given a studio on site, and so became friends with a lot of the construction guys that were working in the foreman. And John O'Connor, absolutely amazing guy who was contracted with Mace. I knew that they had to excavate 16 metres down from the site. So I asked the construction workers if it was possible to, at every metre stage of the excavation, just bring me up a bin bag of stuff that they've excavated. So in my studio, 16 bags of different material. And I knew that it's quite interesting thinking about this 2 metres of archaeological time and then this, geological time. And talking to John about this, when he asked me why I wanted this, he said, "Oh, Freya, you might be interested in this, but we've just had the archaeological cores done for the building. And so we have these 3 cores that have the kind of different depths below the building. Would you like them?" So I said, absolutely, yes, please. So I had all this material and I thought, well, I want to know if there's a collection on an elemental level between our brains and the site. So I asked John if he could do me a really big favour and see if it's possible to get me the soil reports of every chemical element that had been found on the site, and he amazingly did. So when I had this, I took this to a neurologist, Jennifer Pocock, who really very generously gave me her time to kind of look through and kind of make any correlations between what chemicals would be found in the brain and what was be found on the site. And we found 2, calcium carbonate and magnetite. I'm not going to explain why these materials are pertinent to dementias because I will get that wrong, but they are, and we had a really interesting conversation about that. And magnetite is interesting because it's not really been proven as to why it's found in our brains. It has been proven in carrier pigeons that it's used as a geolocation. It's the most magnetic, naturally occurring mineral on the planet. So I wanted to work with these 2 different elements. Turned out to be the chalk from 35 metres below site and magnetite. And I decided to make a compass. And I also wanted to make something that had the scale and weight of a brain, actually. That this massive building is here for these kind of simple, they're not simple actually, incredibly complex, but small and quite humble in size and weight. So I kind of was thinking about that and the kind of idea, that the ramifications of these kind of small objects. So when the building was at its lowest point, the lowest excavation of 16 metres, I asked the 2 Johns, John Mitchell and John O'Connor, if they wouldn't mind coming down with me to the lowest excavation, and we're just going to take with their hands a clod of earth. So they would excavate 1 bit lower. And I cast their hand clods. I kind of also wanted to celebrate their work, actually, because I have seen the ingenuity of building this building for 5 years. And I wanted a nod to them, really, in the building, I suppose. So their hand clods, which are quite strange clods of earth, as you can imagine, they've been cast. So one of them has been cast in the chalk from beneath the site, and one of them has been cast in magnetite. And they're going to be suspended through the central well of the building. So in effect, I like to think in a kind of poetic way it's turning the building itself into a compass, because the magnetite will always attach itself to a magnetic north. Again, it feels like whoever sees that in whatever day they're having or experience they're having there, it's kind of locating them to the here and now, and also connecting them, I feel, to kind of everybody else that's been there, and to this mineral that's been with us from time immemorial, and the chalk as well. When this space was sea, it feels like I'm trying to play with timescales and bring bigger timescales in. It's worth saying that everything feels co-created because there's been so much input. There's been so much generosity and sharing of knowledge that's been incredible in this project. But I suppose I wanted to really push that and see what I could make if I started with an idea and took it to a kind of small group of people. And I also wanted to make something that felt completely participatory. So this idea of making work that was always unfolding, I wanted to invite the future visitors of this building into the making of that work. And I think the other strange notion that I had was, would it be possible to make a piece of artwork that potentially helped or contributed to neurological research itself? So those were the kind of parameters of this work. And I knew that the British Library was just up the road from where this centre is going to be. And I was very interested that they have a water library. So they have an open source library where people can kind of contribute field recordings of water from all around the world. And That for me felt like this really wonderful repository of other people's memories, essentially. When you listen to the recordings, you can hear voices around you, you can hear birdsong. I mean, really a worldwide collection that you could continually able to contribute to. So it's also, evolving all the time. So what we've done is I'm working with Zekan Wu, who is a kind of holistic AI developer. And my question to him was, could we build an algorithm that could essentially take people on a journey and give them a piece of water so they could go on a journey through water. I was thinking a lot about wishing wells, of throwing a penny into a wishing well and making a wish, that kind of simple, wonder, joyful transaction, I suppose, but also thinking about taking you out of the building. So I suppose if the compass locates you in the here and now, and the atlas gives you a window into somewhere else, this is a way of taking a journey through other people's memories to somewhere. And it felt like it would be a collaboration between that person's memory and you, where your imagination meets this auditory sound. So we have devised an algorithm, and we've also worked with Oliver Hayes, who is a rare dementia researcher who's interested in linguistics and dementias. So we've built an algorithm that essentially asks you if you want to take a journey, and you are able to describe how you would like that journey to be. You input that word and you get a piece of sound recording of water. The way I think about it is a woven river of sound, this idea that the river will flow through people's participation. So as everybody interacts with it, more water will be kind of given. And hopefully there's going to be an archive so people can listen to the river at its most current iteration. I hope that the works, when discovered, because I think they will be quietly embedded into the space, so it will be a discovery to find them. I hope that when people do, if they had a reaction of wonder or curiosity, that would be really lovely. That idea of taking people for a moment out of what we all know it feels like to be in a waiting room and give them a sense of connection and a flow out of the building, maybe a different journey, a different feeling. I think that would be successful for me.